10 years ago, I first played Borderlands 2. Also 10 years ago, Borderlands the pre-sequel came out. And also 10 years ago, my mother died. So let's talk about that. Good morning, all. So, something that I forgot to record while I was doing all of that camera recording, understandably so, once you get into the video, is that this video is going to have off to the side a fundraiser. Uh, it's not really a fundraiser. There's not going to be an end goal or anything. And anything this video makes is going to go to the Sarcoma Foundation of America. Now, I know you haven't gotten into the video yet, so you probably don't know how that's relevant, but make your own educated guess. I encourage you, if you can throw any money at all over there to them, it would mean the world to me, especially in a time where it seems like every cancer under the sun is being given these large, elaborate months and foundations and fundraisers and things like that. But sarcoma is something that I haven't stopped thinking about for the last 10 years, and it seems like it very, very rarely gets the attention that I think it deserves. So if you got anything, just go over to the side, throw some money at it. I'm going to put something in there. I don't know what, but whatever I can, I hope. And then anything this video makes is going to go there. Please, I encourage you. A lot of people have lost their lives to sarcoma. And as much as any other cancer, I'd like to see more research go into that and figuring out how to stop it. So with all that being said, enjoy the rest of the video. I know that's not usually the way that I might start a video, and that's not usually the game that I'd make a video about. This past year has been a little tumultuous for me. I'm not going to lie about that. My father is very, very sick. Probably won't last long. And it's caused me to fall into a depressive episode about someone else I lost 10 years ago to the date that you're watching this video, my mother. What feels like years ago, even though the video was only released a year ago, I saw a video on YouTube from My Life in Gaming.
It was actually from My Retro Life. I'm sorry about that.
Called Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow and Losing My Dad to Cancer. And that video really, really spoke to me. I lost my mother when I was 16. And when I did lose my mother, I also became very, very obsessed with a certain video game. Now, that video game was not Castlevania, though I do like Castlevania. The game that I'm talking about today is skewed a little more on the controversial side this year, but nonetheless, it means a lot to me. So to start this video off, before I get into anything else, there are some pretty heavy topics, nothing like, self-harm or suicide or rape or anything like that, but there are some pretty heavy topics. So if that's not your speed, don't watch. I'm not gonna feel bad if you don't want to listen to me whine for however long this video ends up being. But jumping off from that straight into it, my mother died in 2014, November 8th, 2014, if I'm remembering correctly. She had died of sarcoma. Now, that sarcoma started out as ovarian cancer, and then it evolved into standard stage 4 cancer, I think, and eventually into sarcoma. Now, I'm not a doctor, so I couldn't tell you exactly anything about sarcoma or what makes it special, but to my knowledge, the thing that makes sarcoma different from usual other cancers is the speed at which it is able to reproduce, I guess. So basically, by the time we had caught the cancer and diagnosed a kind of cancer, it was already spreading. We just didn't know that yet. The sarcoma spread so fast that before we could think, before we could react almost, especially when I'm only 16 years old, junior in high school. You know, that point in your life where you're still just kind of trying to figure things out for yourself. And now all of a sudden you got to deal with a parent dying on top of all of that. It's hard. It's a very hard thing to have to deal with, and I would not wish that on anybody. After being diagnosed that September or August, somewhere in there, she was hospitalized in October. My mother was not very well off. I was, by extension, also, I guess, not very well off, but I was adopted by my grandmother. And I had the luxury of things like insurance. My mother did not. The thing about the US healthcare system is that if you don't have insurance, or if you don't have a way to pay for said healthcare, there's a pretty good chance you're going to get the lowest denominator of healthcare, I suppose. She was turned away a lot by doctors, ignored and given the very lowest denominator of healthcare, Tylenol and ibuprofen, for everything, because that's all in their eyes she could afford. Even though my grandmother insisted that, she don't tell them that they didn't have insurance. I don't want to pass any blame off on any doctors necessarily, even though there are a few that I could. It was theorized when she passed away that had they done a simple blood test around, I don't know, June or July of that year, they may have been able to have caught the sarcoma before it spread, and maybe there would have been a fighting chance. Maybe. All theoretical, because that didn't happen. And musing on what ifs and if they hads and things like that, it's not going to change the outcome. As far as the story goes, that's where it's going to end. It kind of hurts to talk about for obvious reasons, but there are, more elements to that story that I guess I would like to talk about from my point of view. So I'm sure you're wondering, hearing my thoughts on death and my mother and things like that, where does Borderlands fit into all of this? Well, as I mentioned, 10 years ago, as of February 2014, I went back through Steam and checked it. I bought Borderlands 2, and it was 2 years old at that point. But that's all I did. I played it. I kind of dropped it after that, and I never really went back. And I don't know why I didn't go back sooner, but, I played it, I enjoyed it, but the free weekend was up, and I saw no reason to, buy it, really. It just wasn't for me at the time. But that was in February 2014, before all of that stuff with my mother happened. So between February and November, a lot of things happened, right? All that stuff I mentioned to you with my mother, that all probably started around March that year when she got pneumonia. Just going back through old Facebook posts, trying to recollect my memories. She had pneumonia back in, I think, that March. She recovered from it, was in and out of the hospital a lot, and eventually, diagnosed with ovarian cancer. It evolved to stage 4 sarcoma, all of that. That all happened within that stretch of month. But jumping ahead some time, let's go to around, I want to say September of 2014 is probably a good guess. Borderlands 2, I did finally buy it and pick it up, and I played it. And that was because my best friend in the world, the man that I trust more than any other person, I suppose, recommended to me that I play a game called Borderlands 2. And I said, I've played Borderlands 2. And he said, well, you should play the rest of it, because I only played it up to Bloodshot Stronghold, not very far in the game. So I said, fine. I bought it, and I played it, and this time it blew my socks off. I don't know what about it specifically this time, hit me the way that it did, but it did, and I played the shit out of it. Not only did I play the shit out of it, but I played it twice. I played as Salvador the Gunzerker my first playthrough, finished that, but then I figured, you know what? The second time for me in a lot of games is a lot better because I can grasp what's going on better. I know the mechanics. I know the fights somewhat. So I played it again. And this time I played as a DLC character. I played as Gage the Necromancer. And Gage the Necromancer is fun. She's got this unique quirk where the lower her accuracy goes, the higher her damage gets. And that for me was very, very interesting. I didn't consider myself very good at aiming anyway. So a lot of her skills revolve around ricocheting bullets and reflecting damage and things like that. So it was very, very fun. And I played it. And by the time I got around to playing as Gage the Necromancer, all of that stuff with my mother was already in motion. I'll never forget this. It's a moment in time that's burned into my memory. I was playing as Gage the Necromancer, and I walked into Opportunity, which is a map in Borderlands 2. I was at the point in the story where you're trying to, like, replicate Jack's voice in order to break into Angel's chambers and things like that. And I was just playing and playing and playing. I'd been playing all night. I hadn't went to bed. It was Sunday morning. And we didn't go to church that day because we had a family get-together. I guess it's important to tell you now that by the time she was hospitalized, I had not went to visit her once. Here's the thing about being young and having something like this happen. You kind of just don't believe it's happening, I suppose. Looking back, it's easy to say that I was being selfish or that I should have went to visit or things like this, and I agree. But again, you have to remember, I was 16. You know, it's kind of like saying that, you know, your house could never catch fire. You never think about it because it could never happen to you. And then it happens to you. The idea that she was dying had not yet set in with me. We were still very, very hopeful that there would be some miraculous recovery. At least they were. I was just under the impression that things would be fine. They're always fine. You know, people go to the hospital all the time. What I did not account for was that people go to the hospital and die all the time, too. Almost, I guess, as often as they come home, I'm assuming. I don't know the statistics or the actual numbers for that or anything. So I'm playing an Opportunity, I'm fighting enemies, and my grandmother walks into the room, and I'm having fun, and it makes her smile. That smile is something that I don't think I'll ever forget, because it wasn't something she was doing very much. Fuck. She smiled and noticed I was having fun, and then she says to get ready because we were going to my aunt's house for my uncle's birthday, or, you know, then after we leave there, she says we're going to the hospital. I did not want to go to the hospital. And I guess deep down I didn't want to have to go to the hospital because it was so much easier to just pour myself into the world of Pandora. You know, the bandits, the raiders, the psychos, you know, collecting the 11 billion guns or whatever they say in the ads. It was just so much easier for me to do that than to have to deal with what was happening around me, and I did not want to deal with that because I kept telling myself the worst was not going to happen. But as I know now, the worst is going to happen. So we went and we visited, and I guess another thing that's important to know is that I mentioned that I had not visited the hospital, but I had talked to her on the phone a few times while she was there, and she seemed very, very positive, the same way that I was thinking that things were going to be fine. And I remember the last thing coming out of her mouth, you know, maybe I'm wrong, is that she was going to come home soon, and that everything was going to be fine, and not to worry. and that she loved me, and she'd see me when she came home. Jumping back to the story that I'm currently telling, we go to the birthday party, then we go to the hospital, and she's not there. Well, she's there, but she's asleep. She was sedated at some point. Don't know when it happened. I don't remember, nor do I necessarily care if they ever told us at this point if they were going to sedate her. I didn't know that, but she was not responsive. You could talk to her, she wouldn't say anything. She was barely moving, only occasionally shifting. You know, the kinds of things, I guess, that you get when you're sedated. And I remember we sat there for a few hours, and I was upset. For one, because I was dragged away from what I was doing to go to a place that I did not want to go, to face a thing that I did not want to face. And then to add insult to injury, the person that I went to see, I couldn't even talk to. And I remember sitting there, and I think for the first time since this whole thing had started happening, I cried. I sat at the hospital window and I just cried. Because I just wanted to go home. I wanted to get away from that horrible situation, but I couldn't. I wanted to go home. And we did after a couple of hours. We thought she'd wake up, but she never did. And just to save some time in the future, when I say she never did, I mean she never did. She never woke back up. They never brought her out of sedation. She was basically just comatose while we were there. There were no hand movements, no speaking, nothing. You couldn't communicate at all with her. Now in Borderlands 2, a lot of people die. And you see a lot of different reactions to death. You see Roland die, which causes a lot of grief around Sanctuary. You see Angel die and Bloodwing die, and both of those result in grief from Jack and Mordecai, respectively. A lot of people die in Borderlands 2, and I guess all of the Borderlands games, but, people die in them, and the range of how they're able to portray characters dying, something about that to me is still weirdly poetic. I don't know if that's the right word, but that's the word I'm going to use. It's poetic. It feels like these are real ways, I guess, people would react to it. Because so often in media do people die and the world just keeps moving. It's like it never stops, even for a second. And in Borderlands 2, there's a whole mission where the only thing you do is just tell people Roland has died. To me, there's just something about that you can't quite capture. But regardless, Borderlands 2 handles death extremely and weirdly well, in my eyes anyway. Personal opinion. But that's just the base game. There's another part of Borderlands 2 that also covers death, which is what gave title to this video that you're watching. If you're a fan of Borderlands 2, you probably know a lot about the DLCs. Torg's Campaign of Carnage, Captain Scarlet's Booty Hunt. But the one that stands out when I think about Borderlands 2, and this is not at all a hot take or anything, it's a pretty popular opinion, is Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep. Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep is basically a campaign that takes place within Tiny Tina's Bunkers and Badasses game, which is, your standard Dungeons or Dragons fare, things like that. And she's DMing a campaign where you're trying to stop the handsome sorcerer, or whatever his name is, And there are a couple of points in the campaign that, as somebody who played this during a time where Roland's death was still fresh in my mind, and my own mother's death was not too far off in the future, it kind of hit me because there are just some points where they're trying to accomplish a mission or do a thing or this or that, and Tiny Tina's asking things like when Roland is going to show up, or where's Bloodwing, or this or that, and it hits you because it's like she doesn't know, even though they make it clear that they have told her that they're dead, they're not going to show up. Yet she still acts like nothing's wrong, like nothing has changed. And even though most of the characters in this DLC campaign, their analogs act at least somewhat similarly, usually to the characters that they're based on, if they're main characters or whatever. So Roland is a very brave, adventurous type. He's the White Knight, even though he's played by Tina, he's still, in general, the same acting character. The handsome sorcerer is a dick, but Angel, for whatever reason, is nothing like her character, and that does not go unnoticed by Lilith and Brick and Mordecai. They call out that, Roland's death was not Angel's fault. Angel had nothing to do with that. Roland walked into that situation of his own volition to do the right thing. Tiny Tina kind of just writes it off like, oh, she's fake or whatever. But it still just hits you in this weird way. And with all of that being said, I should mention that the reason I went on to play the DLCs, especially this one first, was because, again, Michael had pushed me to play it. Now, in front of all of you and God and everybody, I'm just going to say my piece about that, and talk directly to Michael here for a second. I don't know if there was an ulterior motive behind you urging me to play this DLC at this time in my life where I don't remember if you even really knew what was happening. I don't know. I don't know if you thought I needed to play it because it would tell me something or wake me up or something. I don't know if it was a happy coincidence. But Michael, it was the most important thing that I think you have ever done for me. And I don't think anything you could ever do could quite top what you did for me at that time. This DLC, as it ramps up, you clearly start to see what's happening here. Tina has lost somebody who was very, very close to her. The only thing she had to a parent figure, let's say. And she is now coping with that through playing this role-playing game to escape from what has happened, so she doesn't have to face it. And in her own words, it's her game, and he doesn't have to die if she doesn't want him to. And it ultimately concludes in you beating the evil wizard, or the evil sorcerer, or whatever his name is, and Tina finally accepting that someone she cares about, the closest thing to a parent she had, has passed and has been killed, and she's dealt with it in her own way. I'm thinking back on it. I used to tell people that Earthbound was the only game that ever made me cry. I can't imagine that I played that DLC and didn't cry. I always get a little teared up when I play it still because, like I said, there's a lot of parallels between it and what I was going through at the time. Even though my mother had not passed yet, being given the opportunity to view that I was being selfish and trying to avoid something that I knew that I wouldn't be able to avoid. I don't know, man. It does something to you. And again, like I said, don't know if he had intentions in doing that, but from the bottom of my heart, thank you, Michael, for giving me a kick in the pants. Jumping forward ahead to November 6th, 2014, I bought Borderlands, the pre-sequel. Now, pre-sequel, for all of its ups and downs, for some of the reasons I'm about to get into, will probably still remain one of the most sentimental games that I think I own. For one, I played it in November, and November is usually pretty cold, and I like the cold, and I have very good memories of the cold. You know, at least here in South Carolina, it gets cold, but it doesn't snow, and I actually kind of like that. Now, I'd gone back and forth to the hospital at this point a few times between that first story about going and now, but on November 6th or whatever, I remember we were riding home from the hospital. It was just me and my grandmother, I think. I don't know what drove her to do this. She looked at me in the car and she was like, is there anything you want? And I said, what do you mean? And she said, like, you know, a game, a thing, you know, anything you want. I was like, yeah, I guess there is. And so that night I bought Borderlands, the pre-sequel, and I installed it. And I waited all night for that game to install. I think I waited like 4 or 5 hours. Now that's not a very big game. I can install it on my internet nowadays probably in about an hour. At the time, we lived out in the country, and we had, I think, like 100 megabit internet or something. It was pretty bad. But, you know, waited 4 or 5 hours until it finished at 11 o'clock that night, and I'd spent all day at the hospital, and I started playing Borderlands, the pre-sequel, with Claptrap, because I hate myself. That's a joke.
So I'm sitting here editing, and I remember there's another thing that I very don't think about a lot. One of the things that I associate with Borderlands, the pre-sequel, and I've never really understood it, is the song Majestic by Wax Eye. Oh, hello, Ori. That song never appears in Borderlands, the pre-sequel, and it's something that I sometimes forget. The biggest reason that I associate that song with Borderlands, the pre-sequel, is because as I waited for the thing to install, you know, fading in and out of naps and whatever, and checking the status because I was impatient, I was watching American Dad, and that song appears in American Dad in an episode about Jeff trying to like find and get back home to Haley or something. You know, it's an episode that sticks out in my mind. But I think the real reason I associate it with it is because it seems to fit so well. Maybe not so much in the words, but in the way that it's composed and the sound. It's very space sounding, I suppose, which coincidentally the American Dad episode is also taking place in space around aliens. Not so much actually like relevant to it, but it is something that I thought was important to mention that I do think about quite often.
Now, over the next couple of days, all I did was play pre-sequel, just pre-sequel. That's all I did. And then, you know, I think I got to right before the Drakensberg. And that was on probably November 7th. Anyway, on November 8th, we went to the hospital. Everybody was there, the whole family was there, and we were given the news that they were going to unsedate her. They had done everything they could. There was nothing else they'd be able to do. They wouldn't be able to cure her, they wouldn't be able to cut anything out, because the sarcoma was just moving faster than they could work. And if they had caught it earlier, maybe, but they didn't, so there's nothing they could do. So they were going to unsedate her, and they were going to let her go home, and with any luck, she'd survive until at least Thanksgiving. Just one last Thanksgiving was our hope. So around
10 o'clock that night, I think we were asked to leave and go home. I don't know, maybe we left at like 8. It doesn't matter. And point is, I was back at home playing pre-sequel by 11 o'clock. And before I go any further, I think I need to show you something. I mentioned that on November 7th, I stopped playing around Pity's Fall near the Drakensberg. And, on November 8th, we went to the hospital, stayed there all day. We're told she was going to be discharged, and we came back home. We get home at around 11 o'clock, let's say, and I start playing pre-sequel again, what the video is about, and I start playing. I start playing for probably 20-30 minutes. That's how long it takes you to fight through all the mobs and enemies leading up to the entrance of the Drakensberg. And I stop here. This is where I stopped. I paused here. It's a good spot for a screenshot, taking in the atmosphere, not something I really did a whole lot. This spot means a lot to me, because it's where I got the worst news that I would ever get. I sat there, I take a break, go to get a sip of water or soda, whatever I was drinking at the time, pick up the bottle, take a sip, put it down, and about that time my sister bursts through my bedroom door, which was not something she was a stranger to doing. In fact, that bedroom door always had issues because she would push it open rather than turn the knob. So she comes in and she throws herself around me. Her arms around my neck. She's crying into my shoulder. And that's because she got the news, before I guess any of us did, that my mother had passed away. In fact, she passed away almost as soon as we left. We were all out of the hospital room. They took the life support machine or whatever she was on that was keeping her sedated off. And as soon as they did, she died. Now listen, anybody with siblings knows that you don't always get along with them, especially when you're 16 and 15 or whatever. You don't get along with your siblings when you're a teenager, but I imagine that a good many of us, regardless of all this trouble and strife that we've been through with our siblings, we would do anything for them. Anything. If I had the power to move the sun, the moon, the mountains, if I had the power to do any of that, had the chance to make her stop frowning, in that moment, in my mind, I would do it. I would do anything in the world to make sure that my sister does not have to frown anymore. Unfortunately, that's not something I could change in that moment. Despite, I guess, always being considered the smart one, I wasn't a doctor. I wasn't a miracle worker. I couldn't move the sun and the moon. I was just as helpless as she was. Me and my sister, we have been through a lot together. And in a lot of ways, because of some things I'll talk about in a couple minutes probably, she wouldn't be here if it weren't for me doing the things that I could do for her. And I won't get into all that right now, but I love my sister very much. And I could never in a million years describe to you how angry and how mad I was at the world at that time that she had to suffer, because me, I can deal with it. I can put up with it. Whatever you want to throw at me, go for it. But don't you dare make my sister a victim of that. And I couldn't do anything about it. And she's not a physical person. She doesn't show affection physically except to her husband and her kids. She doesn't like to hug, she doesn't like to kiss. She doesn't like to do those kinds of things, but in this moment she came to the one person in the world, I guess, she thought could give her some kind of comfort. And that was me. And I couldn't do anything about it. So I sit here in the Drakensberg, and every time I view this angle, it's burned into my mind like the sickness that you have before you vomit, like the last thing you saw before a traumatic event. When I think about this, my mother died in a hospital in Columbia, South Carolina. But in my mind, my mother died here in the Drakensberg. And I was on a Skype call at the time with Michael, who I've already mentioned, and my friend Cody, a different Cody. I don't know if they remember when I uttered the words, "She's gone." I don't remember if they acknowledged it. I don't remember if they heard that or heard the exchange or anything. I don't know if they remember that, but I remember it vividly in my head. Life is hard, and you have to cling to the things that make it worth living. And for me, I guess in the spite of all that was happening around me at that time, it was my friends, it was my family, and it was Borderlands. All of them. Yes, even pre-sequel, which was at the time considered the worst. But I suppose now that's been taken over by the movie. You know. What a shit show. Anyway, I guess it's time we transition back into the real world. So, let's deal with that. Back here in the real world, I did keep playing pre-sequel. After there was nothing to drag me away from that computer, you know, that's all I did. It's a little bit weird when I think about it, because now, you know, if I get depressed or downtrodden or whatever, you know, I might not do anything for days, but during those times, when I got depressed, I wanted to bury myself in video games or anything that could take my mind off of it all. And for better or worse, you know, sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. This time, I don't think it did. I became very, silent. It took a couple of days, I think, before anything occurred to me had happened. Really, and that's always a weird thing to describe. It's probably something you've heard, is that you won't, I guess, realize someone's dead until it's been a couple of days. Right? Because the shock of it happens so fast, but your brain doesn't process it until, I guess, it's ready to process it. But that's all I did for a couple of days, and I think the only time I stopped was to eat, sleep, and buy funeral clothes. I didn't see the reason in going to the funeral, because she was dead. She was dead. There was no reason to go to the funeral. The next part of the footage became corrupted. The audio did anyway, so to clarify, I did end up going to the funeral. Honestly, really wasn't my choice. My thoughts have changed a lot about that. It was probably best that I did. The funeral is kind of the last time you get the ability to receive closure for these kinds of things. I felt like I had to stay strong, not cry. And I'm sure that's not a surprise to hear from a man who was raised in South Carolina, that I thought I was expected just to not cry at all. Of course I did, but I felt guilty about it, and that's not something that anybody should ever feel when it comes to a situation like this. But when all of that was said and done, I went back to school in a couple of days, probably, I don't know, the following Monday or the following however long I was given to grieve, which was probably no more than like a week. And when I went back to school, I didn't have very many friends at school, but when I went back to school, people who would normally pick on me or be mean to me or whatever, they were coming up and talking about how sorry they were for me and how nobody should have to go through that kind of thing. And, a couple of them gave me hugs. The same kind of people that, like I said, would pick on me or, make me the butt of the joke or whatever, because don't know if you noticed, but I'm not exactly the epitome of Southern country boy, which was the popular archetype at school, because we're in South Carolina and that just seems to be the popular thing. But, I'm not that. So I was always the weird kid, left out. I liked movies and video games, and they liked hunting and sports. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know where me and religion really stand, I don't know if I'm agnostic or if I'm an atheist or something. That's not something I've figured out, And a large part of that is because of the stuff that I went through with my mom, because a lot of it left me up in the air. I'm pretty at peace with accepting that I might be Christian, but I might not be, I guess, the same kind of Christian that people would expect of the term. One thing that I remember, I spoke about how the people at school treated me and how all of a sudden they wanted to be sorry for me and things like that. And I remember the thing that pushed me over the edge, that made me hate going to church or hearing about God or anything like that, is sitting on a bench that was outside the school. It's where I always sat. I would eat lunch and then I'd go sit on this bench outside in the courtyard and listen to music until lunch was over. Then I'd go back inside, things like that. And I remember a kid sat down next to me to get my attention, and I pulled my earphones out, and he started talking to me about Jesus and God. Now, I was already pretty upset because being from the South, when somebody dies, that's what you hear a lot. You hear a lot about God and Jesus and things. And at this point, I was sick of hearing about it. But I always entertained the idea because, can't stop other people from talking. Might as well just let them get it out their system and leave. So he starts talking to me about Jesus and God and things like that. And near the end of the conversation or whatever, he looks at me, this young, I don't know, maybe he was striving to be a pastor. Maybe he thought it would help. I don't know. But he looks at me and he says that it's not a bad thing your mother died. God took her home to be a part of his army, and she's serving a greater purpose. And I said some things to him that got me into a lot of trouble that day. I'll leave it to you like that. It was the most insulting thing that I think has ever been said to me. Because I, first off, didn't like this kid. I knew what he was like outside of moments like this. And in all honesty, I still look back and think that maybe, just maybe, it was just some other cruel prank that he was pulling. I don't know. I don't know what the point of that conversation was to end it off, to try to tell me to be happy she's dead because she's serving God or something. I don't know. I know my mother was Christian, and I know that she was probably at peace when she died with where she was going, I suppose. You know, and I don't like to take those kinds of things from people. But I think that day something spiteful arose in me, and I stopped going to church for a long time. I feel like everything does happen for a reason. And like I said, I don't know if that reason is to appease a god or if it's, you know, to by some grand design. I don't know. But what I do know is that I can't change that. It doesn't matter what the answer is to me. If there is a God, if there is not a God, if there's an afterlife, if there's not an afterlife, none of that matters. Because whether it's true, whether it's not true, I can't change it. But I can change how I react to things. And the thing that gets me through those thoughts is something that my grandmother told me a long time ago. I mentioned earlier that I was adopted by my grandmother, and that was not some offhanded remark that I made just to make it. I was adopted by my grandmother because my parents, they were drug addicts when I was a child. They put me and my sister into a lot of dangerous spots that we should not have been in as children, babies. We should not have been in. They did eventually kick the habits and divorced because while they still loved each other, they determined that being together made things bad, and when they were around each other, they would fall back into those habits, and so it was just better for them to stay apart. And later on, before my mom died, I was adopted by my grandmother because, for one, I was just afforded more opportunities under her care than I was under my mom's care. And it took a lot of deliberation for them to come to that. And when my mother went to rehab for it, they told her a little prayer, a mantra, and my grandmother told it to me sometime after she died. Because as you can imagine, after she died, I was not well. I was angry. I was a teenager. I was dealing with school. Things kept piling up, and I was not dealing with them well at all. Because it felt like my entire world had stopped, but the rest of the world kept moving. Only 3 days after the funeral, I was expected to just go back to school and everything be okay. How was I going to do that? How could anybody do that? But that's what's expected of you in this world. And with all of that being said, back to the mantra that they taught her. It's a mantra that I think about a lot, and I have to repeat it to myself a lot. And it's how I go through life now, with as little stress as possible. That mantra is, God grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And it really helps because when people die, when people get sick, people like to play the what if. What if we do this? What if we had done that? You know, what ifs. What ifs start rolling out of people's mouths. Fact of the matter is that what ifs don't change anything. You can't change it. So there's no point in musing on the idea of what if you can. And this is a Bible that I received my senior year of high school after she had already passed away. I realized that it's not religion that made me upset. It's more the people who engage in the religion. The people who say, anything's possible, miracles can happen, God can do this, God can do that. And I find that a lot of the times that while I'm not going to debate if that's true or untrue, a lot of the times that's not the part that matters. What matters is that though he can only change those things if he so pleases, and if he does not so please, then why would I sit around and hope that he does? So without Borderlands, I don't think I would have been able to face the reality of denying something isn't going to make it go away, or that you should anything like that. Borderlands means a lot to me. It means a whole heap of a lot. And I know that especially this year, it's kind of become something of a joke. People like to point and laugh at it. Borderlands movie, Kevin Hart is Roland, and now it seems like there's an internet psyop of some kind where people are trying to convince other people now that Borderlands was never good, it was never funny. While everybody can have their own opinion, I love Borderlands. Those kinds of things shouldn't bother me as much as they do, but obviously when something is as close to you as this is to me, for reasons that I hope are now obvious, it's hard to ignore those kinds of things. So no matter how many shitty things Randall does, no matter how many terrible lines of dialogue are written, no matter how woke the games get, no matter what they do, I owe Borderlands a lot.
Making this video was a bit of a challenge, and I'm sure you could tell by the amount of times that I was on the brink of tears, but I've been reflecting a lot in the past couple of days because the video is over at this point. At this point in time, when I'm recording this, I already know how the whole video plays out. I've been thinking a lot about Borderlands and why the words denial, anger, initiative really stand out to me anyway. Um, I went over a lot throughout the video about how much denial I was in because, when you're a child, you just want it to be over. So I was in a lot of denial about what was happening. That things were going to be okay was the hope, but of course that's not what happened. And once it did happen, I was angry at myself. I mean, I was very, very angry at the world. Having something like that happen made me want to take the initiative, I suppose, to not do that again. I mean, right now, my father is very sick. He's facing the same issues that my mother did, and I've been there a whole lot more for him than I ever was for her. I suppose going through an experience like this is bound to make you want to be more involved, I guess. I suppose in a little bit of a weird way, that's kind of just the lessons that I took away from this whole experience that I spoke about here. It's okay to be in denial some of the time. It's okay to be angry about it. It's okay to grieve and go through the process of grieving, bargaining, denial, anger, all those kinds of things. But when somebody dies and you reflect and you think you could have done something better, if you ever get the chance to do it better with someone else, you take the initiative and do it better. Because if you can't be better than you were yesterday, there's no point in tomorrow.
This is a Borderlands gold chest thing. I forget what it was. I bought it, I think, off ThinkGeek back in like 2015 or 2016 or whatever. I'm not going to show you what's in this box because it's very, very personal to me. But this box holds basically everything that I have of my mother. which isn't a lot, because like I said, she didn't have a lot to give. But basically everything that means anything to me, including something that you've probably seen in the background this whole video. This is an N64 controller that I modded a couple months back. I made a video about it, but that's why I gave this controller a new life. It's why I hold on to childhood toys, small video games that I'll never play again. The memories that I have of her, because even though I don't have like her car or her house or a ring or anything like that, those are the memories that I keep with her. I keep with me, rather. And those are the kinds of things that I like to remember about her. With all that being said, I gotta take a shower and wipe my eyes. Because I still gotta edit the fucking thing. I'll see you later.
Goodbye.
And in the days to come, they'd think of their fallen friends, of the adventures they shared, both real and imaginary. And they'd remember that no matter how bad things got, they were never truly alone so long as they had each other.
I love you guys.
And then Claptrap said something stupid and ruined everything.